Well, this week the comedian Ben Elton said that the BBC is too scared to make jokes about Islam. There were protests by Christians outside a lecture by Richard Dawkins, who's here with us today. That was in Inverness. And a few months ago, the Oxford Union caused an uproar by giving a platform to Holocaust deniers. 60 years on from the enshrinement of freedom of speech as a human right by the UN, we ask, does that mean we have the right to offend? Well, Miriam, we heard from you in the first debate. I'll come to you now, because the supreme irony about this Dutch film that was taken off the internet, this Dutch film, the contention of the film was that Islam is a violent religion, and it had to be taken off the internet because of death threats. So it kind of, some people say, it kind of proves the point. But surely that is an argument that we need freedom of speech. We need the right to ridicule. We need the right to offend, don't we?
Well, personally, I mean, I'm European through and through, and I would absolutely not want to legislate on people's right to express their opinions, and absolutely. But I think more worrying is, why are we asking the question of, you know, do we have the right to insult? I mean, I don't walk around in my day-to-day thinking, I'd really like to insult somebody, but do I have the right to do it?
Okay,
you know, I think perhaps we should be...
What about the Ben Elton point? We've had loads of comedies. Remember, people of a certain generation, you know, as old as me and older, remember Dave Allen, all the jokes about priests. We remember that we've got the Vicar of Dibley. Are we going to get the Imam of Bingham? You know, are we going to Bingley? Are we, you know, where is the sitcom in a mosque?
I mean, actually, it's funny you say that. There's a Canadian program called Little Mosque on the Prairie, which is a, you know, a comical show. No, it is. It's Little Mosque on the Prairie. And it's a comical show, and absolutely not. There's been an astounding reaction to it. People have loved it, and they've loved the insight that this has brought into kind of the day-to-day of normal Muslims. You know, not the ranting and raving people that we typically see on TV.
Keep up to your word. We have a right. We maybe have a right to ridicule, but do we have a right to offend? A lot of it, like the cartoons, it's just gratuitous, isn't it?
But directly taking that on, I've just come back from the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, and their intent, the Organisation of Islamic Countries, in getting international defamation of religion legislation, so worldwide freedom of speech is going to be impinged, and that's dreadful. That's what underlines our whole democracy and our civilization, is freedom of speech. Fortunately, we're
freedom
getting
to say
rid
anything
of...
you want.
The dividing line, the line is inciting hate speech, inciting violence. You should be protecting the person, not the religion.
OK, Douglas Murray. Harris Rafiq in a second. Do we have a right to offend?
Not just a right, but there's a necessity to offend. When something is standing there, it's perfectly obvious, which needs saying. I know Geert Wilders a bit, who made the film in Holland. I knew the people who made the last film that did this in Holland. Of course, Theo van Gogh was shot and beheaded on the streets of Amsterdam, and his colleague Ayaan Hirsi Ali was chased into hiding. People are very aware of the danger of criticising Islam. They take the lesson from it, and a lot of people still fail, despite this, to realise the incredible irony at the root of all this, which is a group of people who say my religion is peaceful, or I'll kill you.
Yeah, but never mind that. What about Jerry Springer, the opera? What about other examples?
Well, but Jerry Springer, the opera, gets protests, as I gather happened the other week with Professor Dawkins. You get protests, but does anyone honestly think that they're likely to be killed for making a joke about Jesus Christ? No, of course not. There's The Life of Brian. There's countless films about it.
Lots of people are equally offended by that,
well, of course they're offended, and they have a right to be offended by it. But what happens when one religion manages to have a totalitarian hold over freedom of speech in it because people are genuinely concerned about criticising it? There is a problem, and that is an unequal situation. You say one religion will be absolutely allowed to be let free from all of these criticisms.
The right to ridicule.
Absolutely. I think there's nothing wrong with ridiculing, with criticising, with speaking up against something, whether it's religion, whether it's somebody's point of view, etc. Where I would draw the line, and I draw the line here for Muslims and non-Muslims as well, is that where there is incitement to hate and violence. Now, let me give you an example of this. Recently we had...
it's a thin line, though, isn't it?
It's a very thin line.
Grey area.
Absolutely. Recently we had a case where we had Yusuf Qaradawi, who is a hardcore Islamist, somebody who actually promotes suicide bombing in the Middle East, and rightfully so. He was banned from coming into this country. Rightly so, he wasn't given a platform, and the reasons for that were that here is somebody who would have been given a platform to incite this hatred, would have been given legitimacy, would have been able to sprout his views. But I think in a case where we have somebody who wants to, like Dave Allen or somebody else, wants to actually make some satire, make jokes about people, Britain has a history of that. We have a history of ridiculing each other, and I think there's a difference between
We have a sense of ridiculousness.
Absolutely. There's a stark difference between death threats, there's a stark difference between hatred and ridicule and mockery, and I think that's where the line is drawn.
What about Nick Griffin, Christina O'Doney? And Robert Shockett, I'll bring him in here. Nick Griffin of the BNP and also David Irving, the notorious Holocaust denier. They were given a platform recently at the Oxford Union. Was that right?
Yes, we have to. We have to be able, as people of one faith or many faiths, to withstand that kind of offensive criticism, that kind of vicious attack.
But what about somebody who lost relatives in the Holocaust, seeing that man up there at the Oxford Union?
Banning free speech is a cornerstone of totalitarian regimes. And they're the very ones that have been persecuting religions for all the 20th century and now into the 21st. Look at the Chinese with the Tibetan monks. We cannot, if we want to have the moral high ground, if we as religious people want to have the moral high ground, we cannot play that dirty card that the totalitarian regimes do.
Rabbi Shockett,
yet if we give a platform to Holocaust deniers, that's what ultimately leads into taking it to the next step of gravestones being defaced with swastikas and whatever else besides. There is no such a thing, bottom line, of freedom of speech. There are always grey areas, there are always laws. I mean, if I choose to say something terribly grotesque about the Queen on national television, there are consequences for that. So there is a bottom line that there is no such thing as freedom of speech. I would only say this. If you want to talk about freedom of speech, let that always be in the context of responsible speech.
Rabbi.
You can have freedom of speech as long as it isn't anything too terrible. The real point of freedom of speech is when it is terrible. And the other point is that by allowing these people to speak, and I agree for the first time for a long time with Christine, that you actually expose them, you actually expose them to criticism, and you don't have the speech being festered. If you stop it, it festers, and it isn't exposed.
Does it fester, or does it legitimise Islamophobia, homophobia, misogyny, and all the other phobias that I can't think of right now?
No.
Does it not?
No,
You
get it out, and these people are sitting.
You get it out.
If you have freedom of speech, people are allowed to criticise it, and so the people who need to hear that criticism hear it.
And it's argued against, and it's defeated by words for Harris Rafiq.
That's ridiculous. If you have somebody like Nick Griffin speaking on a platform, if you have somebody like Karadawi or Abu Hamza, all you need is one person in the audience who's going to take note of what he has to say, move forward and go and bomb somebody or kill somebody. And that's where we need to draw the line. We cannot tolerate the intolerable. If something is intolerable, we must, as a society, have a collective responsibility to stop it.
You don't have to give a platform to Nick Griffin. The Oxford Union was wrong to give him a platform. But does he have a right to say what he says? Yes, I suppose so, just like Holocaust deniers. The problem is that when we talk about Holocaust denial and things like this in the same context as freedom of speech today, Holocaust denial is wrong for many reasons, but one of them is because it's a lie. It's a lie to pretend the Holocaust didn't happen, so you're giving a platform to a liar. When somebody says, as Geert Wilders has done, these are verses in